Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Coco Nomad channel. I am the Coco Nomad, and I talk about location and financial independence here. If you're interested in that, as I provide tips, tools, and techniques to help you make a living and a life, please hit the subscribe button or the notification bell. How about and the notification bell? And go ahead and smash that like button while we get started. This is part two of my videos about my career and my job and salary progression. If you follow part one, I talk about the very early stages of my career and the impact that those jobs had, some of those influences, some of those early experiences. And I just wanted to continue that and sort of roll all the way up to pretty close to present day. And so I call this the salary era because this is after I stopped working hourly jobs and moved into jobs that paid a little bit more or at least paid a salary, an annual salary. And I do this because I really feel like we're shaped by our experiences and the lessons that we learn. And for me, a lot of these jobs, particularly the ones that I'm highlighting, are the ones that had a great influence on how I see things, particularly in my life and in my personal life and in my career. So just wanted to take a look back and do a bit of a review here. So we're going to catch up with the story from part one, and it is now 1995. And I started working at a company called Telecorp, and they were located, so I think up North Atlanta, outside of the city. So this was straight north in the area. I think can't remember Johnson Ferry Road or something like that. If you know the area, but I started with a job title called a production control analyst, and actually I was paid hourly when I first started working there, and I was doing a lot of production work for a telecom company. And what we did was the company built outbound dialers and inbound voice response systems. So if you ever have gotten a call from, say, for instance, your school about your student being absent or there being some kind of issue there, that was the type of system that we built. And I'll share a little bit of a funness by the time I get to the end of this portion here. But my first job, because they also handle systems for cable systems across the country, we actually manually in a database programmed the hour by hour pay-per-view listings. And that fed into our system that allowed people to call in order. So we actually processed the actual order flow for people who had set-top boxes, those cable boxes, and wanted to order a pay-per-view movie or an event like back then it was WWF or WCW Bash at the Beach, or a lot of those kinds of things. These are the $39 $19.99 events, and they also had a lot of adult offerings, and that was always funny to have to edit these adult movies that have all these parody titles for real movies. And so it's just like I spent a lot of my days like fixing like errors and chuckling. So it was just really funny. But this led me into being promoted within the company into my first actual programmer role, where I actually started doing not just the database editing, but actually the coding inside of handling that for those systems. And then I got to the point where I was actually managing the routing of the 800 numbers that people were using across multiple cable systems. And this is one of those things where I really learned about how the phone system worked, because some of the same numbers were being used, and I was routing them based on your area code and the MPA, or the shorter number. And so we know, like, based on that area code that's coming in, I would know, okay, this time this 800 number belongs to, say, for instance, Cablevision of North Texas or something like that. And that's how I would route that. And so that was part of my job. In fact, I remember one night there was a huge pay-per-view event. Mike Tyson was fighting a guy named Peter McNeely. And this was Mike Tyson's first fight after he had gotten out of prison. And the night of the event, we had some execs down from some of the big cable companies to watch from our offices, and there were issues processing the payments, of like routing the calls. So I've literally got execs of my company and these guest companies literally standing over my shoulder at my desk as I'm trying to fix this problem. And I think this was probably one of the first like high pressure business situations I had ever been in. And so I learned, just like, after having those customer service jobs that I mentioned before, both at JCPenney that I mentioned and subsequently doing some tech support, I'd learned to just remain calm despite what was going on. And so this was one of the biggest lessons that I took away from this job. It's just like, even in a high stress situation, when everybody's excited, you just got to breathe, remain calm, and stay focused on what you need to do. And so it was great. And it was my first official programming job too. I did get to do some coding. It wasn't what the kind of coding I do now. It's more like sort of routing, some simple decision making. It was a lot of sort of if else, if this, then route here, if this, then do that. So it wasn't super complicated, but it was my first programming gig. And I made $28,000 a year by the time I left. I didn't start out at that. I was making, I don't know, maybe $8 to $10 an hour when I first went there, and then worked my way to this $28,000 a year salary, which was fine. I got my first second car right right before I left this job. But the interesting thing was I did my first voiceover work there. I was just working, and because we use these systems, and a lot of our clients were local schools and other organizations, I would get called in occasionally because they said, "Oh, we need someone with a deep voice, or we need a Southern Black male voice, or something like that." And so I would go. We had a booth inside because one of the sort of side businesses within the company was providing these voice services. So one of the lines of business, and so there was a recording studio inside of the office. And so I went in sometimes, and there was a woman, Gloria, who she actually still teaches in Atlanta. She teaches voiceover work in Atlanta. If you can find her, you should take her. She's amazing. And she showed me how to do this and do the reads. And I was doing like wrestling events, like, WCW Bash at the Beach, that kind of stuff. And it was like really, really fun to do. And it just turned me onto that was a thing, that was a world where you could be a voiceover artist. And I think that's where it kind of clicked for me early on. So really, really fun experience. I spent a couple of years there, even during the Olympics. Actually, the Olympic torch actually went by our office building on the way to the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta in '96. So this led to my next job. And my next job, when I left that job, I finally went back to school and finished my undergrad. And during this time, this is back when I started going back to school and for undergrad. And I took a job at a company. At the time, it's called the Southeastern Library Network, or SOLINET. Now they're part of a larger group of a larger consortium called Lyrasis. But when I was there, I had gotten a new gig, and this got me into Windows programming, like as a career. I was doing programming like Delphi, and I was doing some database programming, things like that, but not as a career. It's like side projects or school projects or things like that. But this was my first like Windows programming job, where I was writing some desktop software in Delphi. Anybody who knows it, remember Pascal is basically object-oriented Pascal. And the interesting thing about this job was it represented such a huge increase in pay for me, because this was a job that started paying me $35,000 a year, which for me was like, I honestly was like, I made it. Like, I made it. This is it. In my head as a kid growing up where I grew up, making $35,000 a year was just like, this is great. I mean, there was a song back in the '80s, "My Future's So Bright, I Have to Wear Shades," and it said 50K was in the lyrics. So I was like, I could still get to 50K, but that was like the pinnacle, right? I was going to get those sunglasses like the guys wearing in the song. But for me, 35,000, I was like, oh, financially, I meet all my needs. I'm like, more than that. I have money left over. I can start doing the kinds of things that I always wanted to do. Spoiler alert, I would learn later that you can make more money. But I did enjoy this because this led me to being an adjunct trainer with them at some point. And I traveled around the Southeast. I went to tons of libraries teaching librarians technology. So I would do one-day workshops, about 5.5 contact hours during the day, where I taught them about networking and PC maintenance, and like things like XML and network security and those kinds of things. Like, I traveled around with an actual PC that I would break down, take out the motherboard, show you how to replace hard drives and put in more memory, and all these kinds of things, and just general maintenance and cleaning as well. And then managing Windows. Or do like Windows. I actually would travel. I would also have a working machine. Actually, this machine worked that I broke down. I'd actually show you could turn it on, it would work. But I was running virtual machines as well. So I could show people, well, this is what it looks like in Windows 95. This is what it looks like in Windows NT. So I'm totally dating it. And eventually, this is what it looks like in Windows 2000 when we got to that point. And Windows 98, which, if you remember Windows 98, it's better left in the past. But I thoroughly enjoyed it. And this was like my first foray into teaching and training. So I realized that I really enjoyed it. I had a great experience with the librarians who attend the class, even local people. Because what happens a lot of times, I'd be in some tiny library, like for instance, I'd be in a tiny library in like northern Mississippi, and the library is really small. So we're just out in the open, and I'm just teaching, and we're going through this, and patrons would just stop and listen, and then people would ask me, of course, questions of if they happen to have a PC, or just questions about how do you get into this and how these kinds of things. So it was really learned that, even today, a lot of people think that everyone has computers in their homes and have internet. It's not necessarily so. And libraries are the lifeblood of a lot of communities. People really do depend on those resources in libraries because that's where they go to get on the internet. That's where they're going to go to get access to computers. That's where they're going to go to get access to lots of information, a lot of which is still not on the internet. And that's the other thing about people talking about doing their research and researching on the internet. Librarians will really teach you about research and evaluating sources and learning how to get to different sources and leveraging the relationships between libraries. So now, this all was funded through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I did 2 rounds with that, where they would supply these machines and then supply money for things like this training. So it was one of the best experiences of my life. Like, I really look back on that. It was a lot of travel. I was on the road a lot, which also learned that I love that, which would come into play later. Love being on the road, just love it. And it was such a great experience, met a lot of great people. So that took me into the next job in 1999, where I left that company to work for a media company. And this is a media company that made magazines. They came out of print. And, so one of the print products they made were the apartment guides that go into the grocery stores, and people go through them. And that's how you would look for an apartment. I know, right? It's like, can you imagine? We used to also print out directions, like on paper too. Even if you had MapQuest, you'd print them out on a piece of paper. And I would sit in the front seat, someone's driving, or vice versa, reading off, like, turn left here, that kind of stuff. So this is a long time ago, but it represented a huge change in my salary. So during the dot-com boom and subsequent bubble, lots of people were big on internet properties, and this company itself was making the transition from print to digital media and the internet, this internet presence. So I worked on the apartmentguide.com website. And that's what I did with a pretty small team. Actually, there weren't a lot of us, I mean, across the board. I'm talking support, developers, project manager, the whole nine, for what we were doing. So, and it was a really, really impactful experience. I mean, some of those people I'm still friends with to this day. Actually, one still work on projects together to this day. And it's just, it was great. But the huge thing was learning that the market value for what I did was it was a lot higher than what I thought. So I'd left this nonprofit, which SOLINET was, to work for this for-profit company, and my salary went from that previous $35,000 a year to $75,000 a year. So I was really starting to see what was available in terms of salary and money, and it was incredible. And so that kind of led for me funding my first mini retirement, basically, because I worked there for a couple of years. I left in January of 2001, right before the market crash and the bubble burst. So it was an interesting experience in leaving at that time. And in my career, it seems like I've left some companies right before things sort of like went sideways, and then I come back when things are better, because I've done that a couple of times. But just it was an amazing experience. I started working with larger databases. I had touched like smaller types of databases, like Foxbase and some smaller things. And then here I was working with, like, at the time, SQL Server and Oracle. And Oracle was like a big deal back then. And so this is before we got to like the sort of flat, NoSQL type databases that we have now, and the way it's structured in the internet. We still had servers in a room, and they were on site. It wasn't, this cloud stuff wasn't really happening back then. I mean, you might have like offsite in like a redundant location, have more power and things like that, but not the level with like these virtual machines that just get spun up and scaled at the level that we're doing with Amazon, AWS, or Azure or something. So it's really interesting. So that moved me into this big shift, right? So I said I left this gig and I went on my mini retirement, right? So I was doing like a little bit of part-time work, some little bit of contracting work. And that was what I started doing, some contracting work at a hospital in Rockdale County. And that was right before I went to Spain. And I was doing that work for them for a bit while I was still in Spain, like sending these crystal reports. I was running crystal reports and then sending those reports back via email to the hospital, the IT department, and just taking Spanish lessons and doing my whole like Malaga, Spain, living in the Costa del Sol, like enjoying life. And that was what really happened for the most part for that period of 11 years, where I would do contracting to various degrees of hours up and down. I would like work on projects with friends or come in and like I did a lot of contracting for Atlanta Public Schools during this time. And so I started out like working on their website, and then I started doing some other projects within the organization, and then I started downsizing my hours there. So I went from like 40 hours a week when I first started working on the project down to like 10 to 20 hours a week by the time that I was rolling off of my engagement there. I did briefly work for a law firm. I worked for a big law firm, like one of the largest law firms, for about 6 months. I worked for a consulting company for about 6 months. And that's when I got into like learning about data warehousing and these kinds of things. But in between those, I would just be, doing whatever and taking my little breaks and playing golf and hanging out in coffee shops or going to the movies. And then finally, I did go to graduate school, like in around 2005, I think 2005, 2007. That's when I was in graduate school to get my MBA. And I still was working, during that time as well, and trying to do other things because I had these dreams at one time. I was like, I'm going to play catch up in life, and I'm going to fight MMA of all things, which even now I look back, I'm like, what was I thinking? Like, why? And at the same time in school and working and stuff, just like, oh, we just squeeze that in there too. And so it was very interesting period. This is an interesting period in my life where it's just like trying to do these different things. And then eventually, though, I left. I left Atlanta and went back to North Carolina, where my family is from. And it's because I actually bought a house there. I bought a house when I came back from Spain in 2002, 2003. And the house just really sat there for a long time, where I would come home sometimes and stay there, but I realized I was really bored there. There wasn't a lot for me to do in this town. But I went back some years later to sort of like cut my costs, for one, because again, I'm not working full time. I'm doing like contracting work and these other things, and trying my own projects in between. I was initially trying to do my own apps in the app store, but I had a mortgage and I was paying rent in Atlanta. And it just was like, this doesn't make any sense. So eventually I just sort of like downsized, and what I called at the time, near source myself, not outsourcing. I went to a lower cost place as my cost of living was really low there. I had family there, and it was great. I got to spend time with my grandparents and my cousins and my uncles, because they didn't live in Atlanta. My aunties all live in Atlanta, and my uncles lived in North Carolina. So I spent time there learning a lot, and it was a slow down kind of life. And eventually, I ended up making a friend at one of the local meetups, and he worked for a company called TeamSnap. And this is when I was already doing app iOS development. I was doing contract work with one of those friends that I met, the friend that I made at my Primedia HPCI days. And that's when we started working together on some projects. And in between those projects, then I eventually met my friend who brought me on to TeamSnap. And then I became a full-time iOS developer as a full-time job. And again, experienced another leap in salary. Now, I'm not talking about the contract stuff, because the contract stuff hourly, a lot of them did pay more per hour, but I wasn't working 40 hours a week and have a lot more cost in that too, right? I've got to pay all these different, I got to pay more in taxes, I've got to pay all these other expenses just being an indie person. So in terms of just salary, though, this was a huge jump again from that previous job. And I think I started at like 98K a year. And by the time I left, I was at 105. And so this was my first six-figure job like this. And only actually, I haven't had a job since pay six figures, but it was really big. But the big thing for the company was that it was a remote first customer focused company. And I loved that. And I still do. And remote work was built in. So even as far back as 2013, this idea that I can work remotely. I had some challenges with that. Some of the contracting work that I was doing, some of the people that I was working for, particularly at the school system, they wanted me to be on site, even though I never talked to anybody. I sat in a cubicle and hardly interacted. They still had this idea that you need to be, in this chair, in this cubicle that no one ever sees. But hey, it made people feel better about productivity. And that's when I started learning about how, these old method of management is like, if I can see you're working, when I clearly saw that not happening with there, I would walk around, I see people on Facebook all damn day with at their desktops. And it's just like, but they're here. So that counts as work. So but with TeamSnap, it's totally different. Remote first culture, very, very customer oriented, loving their customers, loving the product, and always making that a primary focus. In fact, I used to do, everyone at the time that I was there took shifts doing customer support, and it was email support, but you always stayed in. I loved it because you stayed in contact with the customers. You really understood what they were dealing with the product. And when I say it was top down, even our CEO did shifts of customer support. I remember some Sundays I'd be on and he'd be on doing tickets as well. And it was just amazing. And I was like, this is what it looks like when you care about that to the level. And it really means it permeates the entire organization. And that's something that's always stood with me, which is one of the reasons why I'm back after a 5-year hiatus, these mini retirements. Now, if you want more details, you need this channel. I do have a video I'll drop in the description about the mini retirements. And I go into detail about some of these other things that I mentioned that I was doing, and all the just breaks and some of the fun and all that kind of stuff, and blowing through all the money, which is the other thing. So, and now I'm back after 5 years, and I'm really happy. It's like a great team. And I know the company itself has gone through some lumps and bumps, like I mentioned, just like with Primedia, where I also briefly went back in 2012. I didn't stay, but it was good to be back in another great team of mobile developers, and having not went from working on the Apartment Guide website to working on the Apartment Guide iOS and Android apps. And so that's what I do here at TeamSnap. I work on the iOS app. I'm not doing Android anymore. So I'm really focused in one platform, which is great. And the team is great. And the company is really committed to maintaining that level of standard, high standard of the product standard, and they're just committed to having a great organization where everybody feels valued and working. And we talk about this stuff all the time, and it doesn't mean that things are perfect, doesn't mean that everything goes well, but I love the fact that we address those issues when they come up. And so I'm happy to be back as a part of an organization. Literally, something just happened yesterday, and it was like, a bunch of us had to scramble and team up. And I was just like, this is exactly what I came back here for. Because I've done projects by myself, but there's something about working with other people and putting heads together and getting different ideas together and tackling something in unison and achieving something together, and that I just really missed in doing things as a solopreneur or just working on my own projects. And so that is where I am today, happily returned. So it's like, see this entire sort of story, this journey from being this 14-year-old kid picking tobacco in Connecticut, and cucumbers in North Carolina, to being here, living globally, really, in a life, traveling around the world, working with great people, but having these amazing experiences as well. And I just encourage anyone on their journey, just seeing the things that I was doing and how it played. It wasn't linear. Things just kind of jumped around. And again, I would encourage you to watch the mini retirements video, because I talk about the nonlinear path and some of the other lessons that I've learned along the way. And I hope this can sort of help you to see that, like, you can start to make different choices and changes, and make your own path, and just take stock of some of these experiences and lessons from these jobs, or even in business ventures, these experiences, and what you can take away and carry with you, carry forward, that can be really impactful and just help shape who you are as a person. As always, I hope you have an amazing day. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to drop them below, and I will talk to you next time. Cheers.